Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1104 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. Holy hell, guys, what a punch. Honestly, I'm just sitting here incredibly thankful that Oda decided to let that land. This definitely goes on the very short list of most impactful punches in the entire series that, like, when it's drawn, you can physically feel it. Saturn's arm literally vaporized. That was wild. But if you had to boil down the chapter 2, it's like most basic element, man. This was a chapter which gave me hope. Should have given everybody hope, including the characters in the story. That the government's forces here, Kizaru and Saturn, they're beatable. And Kuma's punch is really responsible for that feeling. The way that it was drawn, which was obviously really spectacular, I think it reminded me, it should have reminded everyone of Luffy punching a celestial dragon in Sabaody. It was that, but better in essentially every way. Luffy punching Sharlos was one of the best moments in the entire series, okay? I want you guys to understand that. That was my original intro to my channel 9 years ago. But Oda was like, wait, hold up, let me cook. I can do it better. And I think that he did. Did Luffy have a personal relationship with Sharlos? No. Did Sharlos have a really personal relationship in history, specifically with Hachi? No. Kuma punching Saturn just meant more. It just did. And it's just another example. We talk about this all the time. The story of One Piece is repeating, but it's not repeating in exactly the same way. This is a perfect example of an escalation. Oda took what he did before and beat it in every conceivable way. We had a regular grunt celestial dragon before, now we have the freaking Gorosei. Before, the celestial dragons were kind of this general evil. With the Gorosei and with Saturn, it has become very specific. We know exactly what they've been doing through the story that we just got with Kuma. The stakes around the punch as well are just on a different level. Like before, Luffy and crew sort of strolled into the human auction house and it was like, well, if we end up punching them, they're not going to see it come. Likewise, nobody really saw the Gorosei getting punched, but for an entirely different reason. Not because he was unprepared or caught off guard. And not because they can't fathom somebody declaring war on the world government like that, but because they believe him to be that strong. Before, the great fear was that if you punch a celestial dragon, you get an admiral called to your doorstep. In this case, the admiral's already here. We've already kind of dealt with him, and it's like, well, the stakes of trying to punch Saturn is just immediate death from the dude himself. Likewise, the Buster Call in Sabaody was just less than. You know, Oda's taken the Ohara Buster Call and added it to Sabaody to just, make sure that we know that this is a huge world event. Every chapter that passes further confirms that the video that I made comparing Sabaody to this arc was basically a spoiler video. It was. But it's freaking awesome to me for us to know so much about what is likely to occur and at the same time still be able to be surprised and be wrong. Like, as an example, we knew pretty much that Saturn would get punched in a similar way as Sharlos in Sabaody. That was highly likely to occur. And in this chapter, we got that. But this chapter also showed you how Oda can invert, twist, and essentially play with the idea. Like, when we first brought this up, the thought that was in my mind is, oh, well, Luffy's gonna do it, right? No, it's Kuma. And as it happens, you realize, like, dang, that's even more powerful. In Sabaody, Luffy had to fight for Hachi because Hachi could not fight for himself. Essentially, he was cowered by fear. In this case, Kuma is like a more empowered version of the same thing. He was ready to fight. There's a few occasions in this story where Oda brushes on this concept, but the one that I want to highlight here is Kokoyashi Village and Nami's village in Arlong. Just like Kami and Hachi and Kuma now, the residents of Kokoyashi were essentially slaves. Just the same as Saturn told Kuma in the flashback, right? For Arlong, it's like, be a slave or die. Those are your choices. And we saw Belmere make that choice. And so, kind of in a similar way as Kuma and his family, the residents of Kokoyashi accept these terms. They know that fighting Arlong will result in their death, and they've chosen intentionally to value their own lives. A life as a slave is awful, but it's still a life, and they can choose to embrace it as best as they can, so long as they don't have to give up what's most important to them, carrying some kind of hope for a better future. What should remind you of Kuma, his family, the message of Nika, them dancing, they found some good amid all the bad. But Oda consistently writes it in this way that everyone in this circumstance has a breaking point. The point at which people will choose to die rather than continue to live as slaves. For the people of Kokoyashi Village, they reached this tipping point whenever Arlong betrayed Nami. When that occurred, they collectively decided to pick up their weapons and fight Arlong, knowing full well that it would just result in all of their deaths. They essentially chose to die. Another example in the story that's similar to this is Ashura Doji and the leftover samurai after the fall of Odin and the Kozuki clan. I feel like that this is an aspect of Wano that wasn't really appreciated at the time that it was drawn. The beginning of Wano, I think to a lot of people, was just really slow, but there's like a thematic point to it. They waited literal years for the Kozuki to return, slowly watching their numbers diminish. Eventually, they gave up hope, and then collectively decided that they would rather die as warriors fighting for what they wanted, rather than die as slaves to starvation or disease. And as a side note, I've long speculated that something similar to this might happen with the fishmen from Fishman Island. But I bring all this up because I think it adds interesting context to what Oda has done with Kuma and how Oda has treated Kuma so special. You'll note that while everyone else has some sort of breaking point, Kuma never did. At least not in the same way. It's easy to think that Kuma was a slave as a child, but then freed himself, right? But no, Kuma was, he might have been free for some time, but then eventually he was enslaved once again. Enslaved in all but name. But unlike most everybody else, Kuma did not have a breaking point because he never lost hope. And he never lost hope because he's a man of such extreme faith. The symbol and the idea of Nika and the promises that entailed gave Kuma the will to endure anything. And it's just so fascinating to me because just like all of these other groups, Kuma also intentionally chose to die. But it wasn't because he lost hope. It was because he truly believed it to be the right thing to do. He didn't go into the battle expecting to lose. His death would bring him what it is that he wanted. Jewelry Bonnie's safety. So this leads us back to Luffy, right? Obviously, the people of Kokoyashi Village, they didn't die. And they didn't die because Luffy stepped in and fought their battle for them. They both wanted the same thing, but he could actually accomplish it. And something similar is true with Luffy and Hachi and Kami and Sabaody. Hachi wasn't ready to fight, but it was abundantly clear what his desires were. So as Luffy himself is doing what he wants, he is also fulfilling Hachi's will. Luffy is very similar to Kuma in the sense that he can't be broken, and he can't be broken because he can't lose hope. It's just not within his nature. He has practically unshakable faith in himself and his friends, which is fitting as Kuma had faith in Nika. Luffy having faith in himself is Nika. Oda cooks at godly levels sometimes. But I think all this serves to illustrate how Kuma sort of embodies both aspects of this consistent circumstance or theme in the story. He is both the slave and the savior. Kuma was literally the perfect character to throw this punch at Saturn. And I think that it's powerful in a different way to see the slave successfully fight for himself. I honestly don't even feel like I'm doing this conversation justice right now because there's so many levels to it. And part of it is the fact that Kuma is already dead. He's already dead. Luffy doesn't need to step in and fight for him because he's not throwing away his life. At this point, Kuma is essentially just a manifestation of pure willpower. He is actually incapable of doing things that he does not want to do, which is ironically and powerful, maybe one of the first times that Kuma has ever done that. Like for Kuma, it was always about sacrifice. Maybe he was doing what he wanted to do because ultimately what he wanted most was for the people that he loved to be safe. But to secure the safety, he lost a lot. Like with Jinny, I have to assume that Kuma wanted to marry her, but he made that sacrifice for her. In a way, taking away Kuma's consciousness allowed him to be free. Maybe this comes off as weird and a lot of people will knee-jerk say, well, that's not true. But Kuma is already dead. So for the first time, what happens to him is truly irrelevant. Finally, Kuma does not have to sacrifice anything to get what he wants. I don't know, man. I don't know if I found the right words, but there's something really profound and beautiful in all of this, which deepens the conversation further because there's other recent events which relate to that. You can think of like Pedro, for instance. Pedro sacrificed himself for the Straw Hats. After it happened, Luffy was quick to accept it, and he made sure to tell everybody not to waste Pedro's sacrifice. And the difference here had a lot to do with Pedro fulfilling his own will. Pedro's death was not hopeless self-sacrifice, and he accomplished what it is that he set out to do. So my rambling aside, I guess what you can take away from this is that having hope is important. And this is what Luffy and Nika inspire in others. Like Robin and Eni's lobby, all Luffy really needs to know is this what you want? Truly and honestly. Whether a sacrifice is good or bad has a lot to do with the intent behind it. And this takes us back to Kuma performing the role of Nika here. Saturn's power literally have everyone frozen. They are unable to do as they want to. Kuma's punch freed them. And this is a whole ass conversation as well. The fact that, look, Saturn's powers were working Initially, Kuma arrives, punches him, and then even after he gets back up, the powers don't seem to be working. I really do think that Saturn's powers are related to fear, similar to Big Mom taking Soul. Like, Saturn has a greater effect on people who fear him. So in a way, I kind of believe that Kuma's punch gave everyone hope, or belief, that Saturn could be defeated. Either way, what seems definitively true is that Kuma broke the spell. And just watching that unfold in the chapter was almost as cool as Kuma himself. The Straw Hats right now are so totally unbelievable. You know, we have the Marines here present, they're all watching in total disbelief as to, you know, what the Strats are actually accomplishing. You know, it's just one of those times where I feel like the Strats have made it. So it's like at the same time as the characters in the story, we as readers are watching and just like, wow, this crew is awesome. And I suppose this is a good segue into Kizaru, who kind of led this conversation. Kizaru is a slave. That's what he is. He's the direct foil to Kuma. Kuma, the man of extreme faith, Kizaru, ye of little faith. You know, I can't be alone in expressing just how cool all this character development has been for Kizaru in this arc. I mean, like, what Kizaru has become, I'm honestly floored by it. Oda took what was essentially a one-note goofy character, and now he's like so incredibly deep. But just the same as Kuma, he's very dutiful in his slavery. But unlike Kuma, this seems like it might be driven by fear. I still feel like there's things that we need to learn about Kizaru, like, what really? Why doesn't he fight, really? I want Luffy to scream at him like he screamed at Robin, you know, what is it that you really want? So that I can help you achieve it. But anyway, to go back to the comparisons with Sabaody, Kizaru as a slave is maybe more similar to Tahachi. It seems like he is totally incapable of fighting for what he really wants. And I find this to also be an incredibly interesting escalation. Luffy punching a Celestial Dragon in Sabaody is similar to Kuma punching a Celestial Dragon here. So you would kind of think that this punch would inspire something within Kizaru. You know, like give him hope, finally make him decide to be good. But that's not really what happened. We can see this with the Strats. They're broken from Saturn's spell. But Kizaru maybe not. It would be kind of like if Luffy punched a Celestial Dragon to free Hachi, and then Hachi refused to go with him. I have a feeling that there's some kind of twist coming soon. Oda has withheld Kizaru revealing his own will explicitly, and that could absolutely play a role in what's to come. But at the very least, I think that, you know, this is what Kizaru does. He is a weaponized incompetence. If he is really ordered to do something that he does not want to do, what happens? He just fails. Whoops, sorry, I guess I'm looking bad. You might have to demote me. You know, that vibe. But yeah, a lot of our predictions about Sabaody is coming to pass, so I think the next thing that we should look for is a big concept in Sabaody was the agent of the government ultimately saves the Straw Hats. That was Kuma and Sabaody. It may be Kuma here in Egghead. It might be Kizaru. Like I said before, guys, it's awesome that we kind of know what's going to happen, and at the same time, like, we have no idea. It's bizarrely true. You know, honestly, man, I have a lot of thoughts about this, but I just really want to convey how excited I am to see what actually happens. Kizaru is frustrating in the best way, and whether he becomes a hero or dies a villain, I want some closure. I want to know that he's ultimately decided to fight for something, for some reason. So we spent most of the last 10 chapters talking about how Kizaru ends up joining the good guys, right? So just for the sake of playing devil's advocate, right? You know, is there a possibility of him resolving himself to fight the Straw Hats? We've talked about sacrifice already. You know, Pedro threw away his life for what he wanted, right? Well, it could be true that Kizaru's sacrifice is harming people that he respects and loves because there's a purpose for it. So maybe it could be something like Kizaru really fears the pirate world. And while he knows that the world government is evil, they protect the world from worse. And he simply and wholeheartedly believes that the Gorosei are a necessary evil, at least for now. And maybe this could in some way relate to Kizaru's unrevealed past. But you guys already know that Oda is kind of unpredictable. A lot of that is, you know, we talked about this recently, he reads the room, right? He tries to gather what the community expectations are and how he can deliver something surprising, but satisfying and meaningful. So these thoughts have started to creep into my mind. We've talked about Kizaru joining the good guys for so long that it's like, well, maybe Oda will choose to zag when we think that he's gonna zig. Maybe this entire event has been a test of faith. Kizaru's faith in the government. And maybe very similar to Kuma, his faith is unbreakable. And while this isn't necessarily what people are expecting right now, it's just interesting in the sense that Saturn, his entire existence and mentality demonizes, quite literally, demonizes the world government, whereas Oda could use Kizaru to humanize it. You aren't automatically a heartless psychopath for consciously deciding to believe in the world government, regardless of what you see them do. And continuing to fight despite that is, whether you like to believe so or not, a form of strength. Like Kuma and Nika, it's quite possible Kizaru's faith in the government gives him strength to endure anything. Essentially, he worships a different god, and only the future, fate, and destiny know whether he was right or wrong for it. And that while he may believe himself to be a cog in the machine, he has not lost hope that at some point, the world ruled by the world government is a better place. At the very least, guys, this is my best attempt to create a rationale for, how Kizaru stays a villain in this arc, all the way to the end. And it also highlights how unique Luffy is, in the sense that Luffy absolutely does not ever have to do things that he does not want to do. Like, what is right for Luffy is what he wants all the time. And that's part of what makes him so strong. There's never any doubt. Luffy doesn't ever have to make sacrifices, with very rare exception. So if Kizaru resolves to fight again, that could literally be the difference in the fight. Kizaru is having to compromise, doing things that he doesn't want to do for something that he believes in. Without a doubt, if this was true, it would hold him back. But yeah, I feel like the reviews always go this way. We spend like a tiny amount of time actually talking about, the things that happened in the chapter, and then we spend all the other time filling in the space between. You guys know how it is. But obviously, this was an awesome chapter. It's another chapter that straight up made me cry. The scene between Bonnie and Kuma, dunzo. After that, it was over. I feel like we've talked this all to death, and now at this point, I've trained you guys, right? Together, we have figured it all out, so, I think we all kind of see the chapter in a different way. But you guys already know that when Bonnie said, "I will never forget you," it was like, Dr. Hero look. A man dies when he's forgotten. There is no chance that Kuma is going to be forgotten anytime soon. He touched too many lives. Kuma ain't gonna die, partner. But the closure of all of it was just perfect. Having, at least, regardless of what happens to Kuma and Bonnie in the future, we at least have this moment of a farewell. Something Kuma never got with Jinny. And I think from this chapter, it makes the absence of that in prior, all the more impactful. There's just something profoundly healing about telling somebody you love them, making sure they know. And I thought that Oda conveyed that situation and that emotion extremely well. But I still haven't given up on the no sacrifices, no compromises ending for Bonnie and Kuma. However that plays out, it felt like a goodbye. It did. But it doesn't have to be yet. And there's obviously a lot of things to still be excited for. I don't think the battle is over. I'm curious if we're going to go full escape mode, how that's going to work. I really don't know. But honestly, guys, we just kind of had a time skip. We've basically traveled back before the flashback. Luffy is probably going to be in Gear 5th again soon. Probably going to be fighting Kizaru again. Everybody is kind of accounted for, and they're trying to escape. The Kuma flashback almost rewound time so that we can redo the escape of Egghead. But yeah, obviously I'm excited for it. But I think that's pretty much what I had to say about the chapter. As always, I'm curious as to what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Remember to check out my book, The Booms, links in the description. If you guys happen to read it, please leave a review and let other people know what you think about it. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.